Hello and welcome to the results stream for round 3 of the 2026 SpaceChem tournament. This level is Elements of Extraterrestrial Biology. It was primarily designed by Pri with some input from me, and you get 3 inputs: ethylene, ethylsilene, and disilene. So they look really similar and just differ in one of them having 2 carbon atoms, one of them having 1 carbon and 1 silicon atom, and one of them having 2 silicon atoms. And the task is to create chromium oxide, so chromium and oxygen bonded together with 2 bonds. The reactors have 8 bonders, 2 fusion lasers, no fission, and a sensor. There also is a recycler here, but I don't think anyone really used that because the metric is cycles. And why would you spend your cycles sending outputs or inputs to the recycler rather than outputting them?
It was to help some fun solutions.
Yeah. So the exact metric was cycles minus 120 because you need at least 120 cycles to output 120 molecules, and also symbols as a tiebreaker with a minor penalty for grab drops so that you use grabs and drops instead of grab drops whenever possible. Some notes from Pri. The reactor count of 4 was specifically chosen to allow both diamond and line topologies. So something like this would be a diamond topology. Oops. And a line, you can probably imagine what that looks like. We also briefly considered allowing more reactors and seeing what people would do if we allowed them to use a lot of reactors for this, but then we thought it would be nicer to limit this to 4 reactors, and we already got some quite similar, not similar, different solutions with that, and I think it was the right decision not to have too many reactors and make it a little bit easier for people also to come up with a way they want to solve this. So that ethylsilene only comes in this arrangement with carbon on the left and silicon on the right is on one hand a limitation of SpaceChem that you can't have more than 3 random inputs. But Pri also thought it would be nice if someone came up with a way to exploit having only 3 of the 4 possible inputs you can make looking like that. And yeah, as we will see, many people did abuse that. The position of the inputs is uniform, so it's always the same to allow you to handle them all the same and maybe bond them together to form a chain or something like that, whatever you want to do, and not already have to handle the inputs appearing in different positions. And our original prediction for what an optimal solution would look like was at around 7 cycles per input, maybe plus or minus some latency tricks. Let's see how that turned out. So we can look at our first solution here, which is by Anning and called I Wish I Could Toss the H2CSI H2. So Anning wishes to just toss this away and use the other 2 inputs. And the numbers I have right here is the cycles per input. So this solution takes 14 plus 15, 14 plus 5/6 cycles per input and has a latency of 74, where the latency is defined by the cycles per input times 180, because for 120 outputs, you need 180 inputs. And all of that subtracted from the total cycle count. You could argue that that is not exactly latency, but it is the easiest to calculate. That usually ends in whole numbers. Anyway, let's just look at the solution. It uses only 3 reactors. And yeah, this first one uses always these 3 atoms that are on top of each other into each other. So for the first input, it creates oxygen and sulfur. And that is also kind of the point of this level. You have to fuse these 2 hydrogen into the atom they are attached to at some point. It's just a question of when you do that and how you handle things around that. And then out of sulfur and oxygen, you have to create chromium and oxygen at some point. So yeah, those 2 get fused right there, and then both dropped into the output zone. And then all of that gets outputted right there. So it just turns these bigger molecules into individual atoms in 2 places. You can also see already that this is a double pumped reactor, so both waldos do pretty much the same job, but run offset on a loop. And that is something that you often see in these kind of cycle solutions. Okay, so what happens in the next reactor? Start from the beginning. So red inputs and blue also inputs, so that there are 2 inputs, and then they both hit their things. Then blue bonds it, red grabs it, so it recombines this. Just kind of unfortunate that this bond here gets broken by the fusion and then created again. Yeah. And then there are all of these sensors to differentiate between the 3 cases. And in the case of SO, gets handed over to blue, outputting the S in the lower output and the O in the upper output. When it's only sulfur, then red just outputs both of them right there. And yeah, it's SO again. This time blue outputs on the left. We will see soon why that is important. And when it's 2 oxygen atoms, they both get output over there. And it's also important to note that the left one outputs first and the right one second. And that is due to the order of how the 2 individual atoms get created when the molecule gets broken up right here. And that's a bit of a technical detail. And then in the order they got created, they get output. Well, it's not input order because they got input as one thing. So the left one outputs first because the left one, I think, is still the original molecule that got input, and the right one got detached from it and is now its own molecule that entered the reactor later, so it gets output later. Okay. So the oxygen and sulfur get separated into their own pipes, and the pipes are rather long to make sure that the solution can run forever, which was an additional rule to this puzzle. All solutions have to run forever, and yeah, we did actually not check if they run forever. We just checked until a certain number of outputs and did not disclose that number while the puzzle was ongoing, because we wanted people to
Well,
not game that.
initially, it was the highest amount that was feasible to check in game, but later on, Yellow Bunny installed the SpaceChem simulator, so he could run the solutions up to pretty high amounts of outputs.
I can also say that amount now, so all of the solutions here have been checked until 2.4 million outputs, and they all keep producing outputs until that, and probably continue afterwards. Now this last reactor, it just inputs 2 input alpha and 1 input beta. And yeah, the blue Waldo doesn't even really do anything, it just sits on output. So this is really simple. It bonds the oxygens together, fuses sulfur into one of them, and creates a double bond. And this works because whenever the previous reactor outputs only this oxygen pair right here, then the left one is first and the right one is first, and everything is fine. But when this sulfur-oxygen pair arrives, then the first oxygen gets placed on the right, and then any oxygen pair gets split, basically. So the left one that outputs first pairs up with the oxygen that was placed on the right, and then the next oxygen that lands on the right pairs up with the next oxygen that appears on the left, and that might be either from a new oxygen pair or from the next SO, which the blue Waldo puts onto the left space right here. So that is how that works. Actually pretty neat that the last reactor can be so simple.
Is this solution sped up by lengthening the first pipe leading out of the first reactor?
We can try that. So this reactor is stalling a lot of the time, but
Sometimes it's not stalling.
yeah, so let's run it to completion once and then see if changing that pipe changes anything. So it takes 2,744 cycles. And if we lengthen this pipe, then it takes 2 cycles more than that. So no, that does not help. I think the first reactor is just fast enough that it can always keep up with whatever the second reactor needs. The second reactor is really the bottleneck here.
I am surprised you can't output the oxygens one tile to the left, both of them. Surely it would be faster. No, out of R2.
Yeah, that looks doable at first glance, but I don't really want to do this now on stream. So maybe someone can do that in their own time. Okay, yeah, so that was the first solution. It had a throughput of roughly 15 cycles per input. And that means that it takes a total of 2,744 cycles. Let's have a look at the next solution, which is by Astronelson. Actually, before we do that, there was some talk in chat about when solutions broke, and Brokios mentioned that they had a solution that failed at around 800,000 outputs. So that's around a quarter of the number of outputs we checked ultimately. And Big Mango Head has an even bigger number for that. That will be a fun solution. Okay. If it is discovered that one of these solutions crashes at a very high output count, will their attorney points be revoked retroactively? No, we
No.
will not revoke anything. We have tested everything.
Well, first, we're quite confident that the solutions shown here do in fact run forever, and even if they don't, it happens at such a time. It happens so many cycles in that we wouldn't have feasibly found out.
Yeah. Everything that you see here will be accepted, even if someone finds out that one of these breaks after a trillion cycles or something like that. That's just the limitations of what we can check in a reasonable amount of time.
Perhaps one could even award fun points if you could somehow prove that at cycle, say, 1E14 something breaks.
Of course, if someone had submitted something that's just a big binary counter that breaks at some point, we would have seen that and could have reasoned that it breaks. So it has to break in a non-obvious way.
Well, it has to do with having some non-trivial knowledge about the RNG. So I think it will be fine.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, let's move on to Astronelson's solution, which has 13 cycles per input. Let's see how that works. And it uses a slightly different layout from what we have talked about with our diamond layout, because here the two middle reactors are also connected to each other with this kind of loop in both ways. So let's see how that is used.
Is the campaign topology. I remember.
It's been way too long for me since I've played the campaign. Okay, so this reactor is also double pumped, and it removes one bond and then the other bond and just outputs the two halves into the top and bottom reactor. This is a strategy and topology that Big Mango had also mentioned in a comment to us that he thought about, but ultimately didn't really see how that would be good. And yeah, here someone has implemented that. And there's also 3 cycles being wasted up there every time, so this reactor seems to not be the bottleneck.
Yeah, there seems to be some time to even fuse up some things if you wanted to. But I guess it happens in later reactors.
Yeah. So let's have a look at this top reactor, even though those two are basically mirror images of each other or something like that. So what does this one do? It gets either H2C or H2Si. It fuses them into an atom and then checks if that is sulfur or oxygen. Sulfur gets outputted here in this top output zone and oxygen at the bottom. Meanwhile, the blue Waldo is just waiting for any sulfur to arrive and will just send that to the top output in a way that it will never collide with the red Waldo carrying any molecules around. So the Waldos are completely independent of each other here. And then in the bottom reactor, we have basically the same thing. Sulfur gets sent up, oxygen gets sent down, and the blue Waldo passes through the oxygen that comes from the other reactor and also puts it into this output zone. And then finally, this reactor inputs sulfur, inputs oxygen, bonds them together with a bond hammer, inputs another oxygen, creates double bonds which aren't fully needed because it fuses this here, and then drops and outputs. So the way the inputs work out, if you just fuse all of this stuff into these atoms that represent half of each input, then you will ultimately get twice as many oxygens as sulfurs, and that is what many final reactors use, inputting one sulfur, two oxygens, and then just creating chromium oxide out of that in some way. So yeah, also pretty understandable what's going on here, and it only takes 2413 cycles. And have a look at the throughput and latency here again. And move on to the next solution by CrazyBot. I wonder what the fourth reactor is for. So CrazyBot only uses 3 reactors, 9 cycles per input, and a latency of 66 on top of that.
I think my historical first solution also did basically this.
So this...
Oh no, it did not. Never mind.
This reactor is actually not double pumped. It uses these 2 rotations to make sure that both Waldos take an odd number of cycles, and just does 1 fusion and then outputs these U-shaped molecules. And also moves them further to the right than the inputs are, which might be useful. Okay, the next reactor. Red is just on a 7-cycle loop and spends 2 cycles waiting for the input, and then fuses again after a rotate. So this one preserves a bond between the 2 halves, rather than creating it again later, which we saw before. And then the blue Waldo just runs around and is not timed together with the red Waldo. It sometimes takes 6, 8, I think 6 or 8 cycles for what it's doing, and is completely not synchronized. But whenever the timing is at the absolute worst, so blue grabs, and on the next cycle red puts something there that blue could grab, then blue only runs through the 6-cycle loop and will be there to grab something again before red arrives on its 9-cycle loop. So this does not cause any issues.
I guess you could also ask the question if this is the best starting arrangement, starting position. Perhaps if you unsynced, if you delayed one of the Waldos by some amount, then it would be more aligned with the win condition.
Yeah, we can try that after we've run it. Maybe you can even prime this flip-flop and save a symbol. Okay, let's have a look at the next reactor, which is the last one already. Since it's neatly separated into oxygen and sulfur using the sensors right here, which I didn't even talk about, I just noticed. So yeah, oxygen just gets sent straight across. When there's one sulfur, it moves down, and if the other one is oxygen, it moves to the right, sitting in between the two output zones. Otherwise, it goes all the way down to the bottom output zone, and then it just debonds in one of those two places and outputs.
Okay, Crazybot says they had not checked. So this is indeed a meaningful question.
Okay, yeah, we'll check that soon. And the last reactor just takes two oxygens here and bonds them together. Then it gets the sulfur, fuses it in, adds another bond and outputs. This one uses both Waldos, but they also stall on sinks and stuff. So there's nothing really that crazy here. The bottleneck are the first two reactors. Yeah, I think actually the very first reactor is the bottleneck here. And takes 1686 cycles. So remember that number, and let's try this. That's 2 cycles faster already. That's not worth it. Okay, so yeah, this seems to be the best 1684. Saving 2 cycles by moving this one space to the left. And you could also prime this flip-flop here and save one more symbol, but let's not do that right now. In next place, we have Zabokar with SO normalization. This one is actually the solution where it was the hardest to figure out what its actual throughput is. And I arrived at 8 plus 2/3 plus epsilon by just running it for a large number of outputs and calculating what the throughput should be. It's really close to 8 plus 2/3, but every 10,000, 20,000 inputs or something like that, it takes 1 cycle extra, I think. Let's have a look at what it does. It's still only using 3 reactors. And the first one is double pumped this time. And it is using like this and simultaneously creating a bond here, which is a nice way of doing these fusions without having to double back or something like that. And then just outputs the 2 atoms on the right side here. Like without this bonder right here, 1 atom would get stuck and not reach the fusion glyph. But like this, it's nicely handled. Then the next reactor, which I think is the bottleneck of the solution, is also double pumped. And it uses the sensor right here to split the 3 cases, like we've seen in the previous solution, between the 2 output zones. And then it debonds that. Also adds a bond here, and I'm not quite sure why it does that. It actually does that for these right here, I think. See that again. So yeah, it hits bond plus here to bond them, and then bond minus to get rid of those bonds. And it also has these atoms sitting around here for a while and only outputs them when something new arrives. And overall, this layout with these occasional outputting two things, outputting one thing, and having sinks which are sometimes offset by one cycle or not, makes it really hard to fully analyze the throughput of the solution.
But it's easy to reason about it.
Yeah,
It's easier to prove that it doesn't break.
yeah, it's easy to prove that it doesn't break, also that it ends up between 8 and 9 cycles. I think if you could get rid of all of the sinks in here, this could actually run at 7.1 or 7.2 cycles or something like that. But I'm not quite sure. I don't remember the exact number from when I calculated these things. Yeah. And then we have the third reactor after some pipes, which just does the usual thing we've seen before in a slightly different way. So this time oxygen and sulfur get fused first, and then it bonds that to another oxygen. Also, it's sitting here for a while before it actually outputs. Maybe with a different Waldo layout, there's some latency to be saved there. Other than that, yeah, this is pretty straightforward, except for figuring the exact timing of this reactor. And it is 1640 cycle, making it 44 cycles faster than the previous solution. And yeah, the throughput went from 9 to 8 plus 2/3. So that makes sense why it decreased a little bit. Yeah, 46 cycles because I made a 2-cycle improvement to the previous solution. You're right, Astro Nelson. Yeah. Okay, then was there anything we wanted to try out with this solution? I don't think so. Let's go to the next one then. And that is by the host. This is our solution we made to figure out how fast solutions might be. And it is
the historical one or the modern one?
It's not quite the historical one. So it's basically still the historical one with some modifications.
Oh,
More
historical
modern.
one was like 9 cycles per input.
No,
So it's
so yeah,
definitely
it's the modern one then. So our first solution, yeah, was 9 cycles, and then we improved it to 8. And this also has some latency improvements that we made later, but we did not get past 8 cycles. Well, we also didn't try for that long. So this reactor is not double pumped. Also one of those things, these relatively simple cycle optimized multi-reactor puzzles usually end up with many solutions having double pumped reactors. And that's just something that never really comes to my mind while solving, so I basically always start out with non-double pumped reactors and maybe later on change that. But that's not really a natural way for me to start a solve. And that is also something that sometimes limits me in finding out.
Why is that not natural? You start with single wall and you just double it.
Yeah, true, but just adding a blue Waldo is not natural to me, I'm sorry. So anyway, this is an 8-cycle loop right here. The red Waldo is rather simple. And yeah, we can see that it has to do this double back because it does not use bonding these two together and fusing already here, which might be better actually, but we did not find that.
By the way, 7 cycles here is possible by way of moving the output command to red and shortening the path by 1.
Yeah. Basically, all of this could run at 7 cycles or even faster, except for this third reactor, which is our bottleneck. So the second reactor just builds a long stick out of these inputs.
Yeah, observe that even though we have the initial fusion done already, the atoms are in a bad spot. It would be difficult to handle them outright. So first off, the too much to the left of the drop zone, and secondly, they are not arranged horizontally. They are arranged vertically. So we have to spend a reactor to fix that.
And this is also not great for latency, that there's always at least 6 atoms just sitting in here, not being anywhere near the output. So let's have a look at the next reactor. It continues building a stick, but this time a shorter one. And then senses one by one and carries the individual atoms to the 2 output zones. And this loop, like, is a really annoying.
This is the bit of the solution that must have survived right from the historical version, I think.
Yeah. It's
really... And is the only time where there is meaningful double pumping.
Yeah, what I wanted to say, it's really annoying to me that there's this empty space on the path, and they would almost work if they had length 6, but then there's just one extra symbol needed somewhere, and timing them so that they always take 7 cycles just doesn't quite work out. So this is also really close to being able to work at 7 cycles, but I just couldn't find a way to get it to work. So this sits at 8 cycles per input, and also makes a nice 8 right here to rub that in our faces.
Well, the correct way to push for 7 cycles would be to make it 14/2. But I did not. I thought about it, but I did not work on that.
Yeah, just handling each atom individually like that is not the best way to do this. And then we have some pipe right here to make sure that it runs forever. And let's have a look at the final reactor, which starts off actually with something interesting. Wait for something to get there. So it starts off down here, making a stick of oxygens and fusing those into chromium. So the first input is created from only oxygen, and then all the next inputs are created from 2 oxygens and 1 sulfur using the usual loop, because that turns out to be better for latency, because at the time when we are around 120 outputs, there are more oxygens. So to compensate for that, we use up some oxygens in the beginning.
No, it's not actually true. It's because we have so much latency otherwise that we are past the usual ending point for most solutions. So you wouldn't need that if you had normal latency otherwise.
Okay, so it's a consequence of our bad latency that we need this. I didn't know that. Other than that, this loop is not that complicated. It just takes 2 oxygens, fuses a sulfur into one of them, and outputs that. And we can see that it takes 1522 cycles. Let's go to the next solution then. After this non-scoring host solution, we go back to the scoring ones. This is Team Absolute Zero, which consists of Rexkix, Gigigol, and Zarkail. And it takes 7 cycles per input and has a latency of 128. This first reactor is rather simple. It uses double pumping and also moving back again instead of bonding. And then just outputs in 2 different output zones. I think that is just in order to not waste 1 extra cycle outputting 2 in the same output zone, because this will eventually run at 7 cycles per input, but during the beginning it actually runs at 6.5 cycles per input. Because the next reactor needs a lot of atoms rather quickly in the beginning and then settles into a 7-cycle loop. Why does it do that? Well, let's have a look at what it does. I'll just let this run and then we can talk about it afterwards.
So observe that input atom position is quite bad. It's because the first reactor has to be very fast. So in order to both make use of that, to both be able to work with that bad input placement and be able to sort the outputs, we have to make this around for some more cycles.
So for a reason that you will see soon, we are creating a 3x3 of sulfur right here and even fusing some oxygens into sulfur. And then it bonds.
I think that's not actually required. But no.
It's required that all of these 8 atoms around here are sulfur. The middle one doesn't matter, but due to how it's bonded and connected to everything, it might matter that it's sulfur. And then it bonds 2 inputs to that. Bonds 2 again. Bonds 2 again. And then it sorts them using bond sorting and doesn't use a sensor at all for sorting. Sulfur has 2 bonds right here. So it gets debonded once, but is still connected, and then debonded twice in output. While oxygen, which only is bonded once, gets debonded over this output zone and ends up outputted to the top. So yeah, you can make a good solution to this without a sensor. Yeah, Rexkix points out that this is 100% a Gigigol solution. Yeah, I'm not even sure how you come up with the idea to use bond sorting in a cycles puzzle where you have a sensor available.
Well, it's because you have to sort a lot of things per cycle. And you only have one sensor. So it wouldn't be enough sorting power.
Okay, so yeah, this is
Well,
definitely.
it's rather natural if you think about it, but you first have to think about it.
Yeah, first having to think about it often is the problem. Now with this really beautiful reactor out of the way, let's have a look at the final reactor. So this is also only a 3-reactor solution. Because of all of the things that happen here, they didn't even need a 4th reactor. And this one is also quite interesting because it just builds a staircase and doesn't even go anywhere near the output zone with the Waldos.
I guess you could mainly spend one reactor on improving input-output positions.
Yeah, I'm also not sure why blue isn't used here at all to move some molecules in this area around. I feel like that could be faster latency-wise. But I also think that GGGoal and Rex Kicks know what they're doing, so maybe there's a reason they're not doing that. Or they don't care about latency. I mean, after the assembly of this block, maybe they just don't care about latency anymore.
Well, there are 120 outputs.
Yes, says, who cares about latency? This is just flexing. Okay, let's run this to completion then. I think RexKicks just said this was their first design for the last reactor that kept up with the speed of this cradle sorting, so they never touched it again. Okay.
I want to see if this is the correct piping. Surely you could arrange pipes so that there would be the same amount of pipes, but less latency. I mean, the same amount of intermediate pipes, but less output pipe.
So, like, if we were to get rid of these,
No, you can mirror the first
pipes through there.
You should mirror the first two reactors. You should mirror the first two reactors so that the short pipe that's now on the bottom can be the top one.
Yeah, you can't mirror this one because this can't be mirrored.
Oh, yeah. Never mind.
Yeah, also because these are in the top row, and after you mirror them, they're not in the bottom row here. And also because mirroring messes with the rotate, as Big Mango Head points out. So there are two problems that might be with mirroring, because that might change the order of those two. And actually, I think this is agnostic to that. So it shouldn't care if it gets SIC or CSI or anything like that. It just sorts everything. But the input position would be a problem with mirroring it. Yeah, so this is our first 7-cycle solution. maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Yeah, that's not really that close to reaching.
Maybe it's not relevant.
Okay, let's stop with this now. The reactor layout is okay for what it's doing. Maybe this reactor is where you could save a bit of latency. And let's move on to the next solution, which is by Kuwokre, also with a 7-cycle loop for the inputs. And the team consists of IEEE, Bruchios, and Davichi. And Bruchios wants to speak.
Actually, you know what? Give me a moment. I need to go to my computer and on my phone. Give me a few seconds.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I threw this together last night and stayed up till like 5 a.m. to get this thing to work, so I'm a little sleep deprived. Basically, the first reactor does this thing where if it senses any silicon in the inputs, it will give it to the top reactor, and then it just outputs all the ethylenes just go into the bottom reactor. You can start running this. Yep. You can take a look at the bottom reactor next because it's really simple. All it does is that it's just fusing everything into a single oxygen loop or stream. Yeah, it's pretty simple. Now, the top reactor is actually it's bond sorting. Yippee! What it does is that it's basically making a stick, this structure of sulfurs, because it knows from the how the inputs are related that the top atom is always going to be a sulfur. So it's just it's inputting 2 atoms at a time, and it's creating a stick with optionally attached sulfurs. But it's doing bond sorting where the oxygens get detached, and then that allows me to make sure that there's always 2 oxygens out at the bottom in the beta input area. And then once it actually detects that it's got once it detects that it's got all of these 8 sulfurs, then that means that we have 1 input bucket worth of atoms. And then what it starts to do is that it starts to output exactly 4 sulfurs in a stream, like a single atom location. And then it will output a stick of 2 sulfurs and 2 chromiums.
So it will try to debond this one first and output it, and then this one. And
right, so this makes it so that it's agnostic to the order of the inputs. It will always be 4 individual sulfur atoms.
And then it just fuses the oxygen in there and outputs the stick.
Yep.
Let's see that once more. So to me, it looks a little bit slow that blue has to go all the way down here and around and then up there.
Yeah, it is a bit slow there, but it doesn't matter because the fourth reactor is mostly latency limited based off of the first 4 sulfurs, so it doesn't matter that blue takes a really long time to get that outputted. You'll see.
Okay, so now we're about to get our stream of sulfurs here. Let's see how the next reactor handles that.
Yep. So this reactor takes the stream of sulfur and creates a sulfur stick. Then the next thing it does is that it will bond 4 oxygens. And then the first time it runs through this, red is going to fuse that to make a stick of chromium. And then the next time it runs, it's going to pick up another 4, and then... Okay, so stop right here. Here, blue is about to start taking that stick of chromium and oxygen and start outputting it in a batch of 4. At the same time, red is about to do some partial processing where it attaches the first 2 oxygens to the sulfurs, and it will actually also fuse in at the same time. Blue will be finished with that, and it will grab a chromium stick. So you can start going.
So blue is outputting now. Red already attached the oxygen, and then it fuses into chromium.
Yep. And then it basically does the second half of that loop one more time. But because we already have some chromium from the previous reactor, we don't need to fuse extra times. Yeah, that's about it. I will say though, you might look at and wonder what that red flip-flop is doing on D6. That took quite a while to figure out. It turns out that this solution is not always stable because you don't know when the top reactor is going to start giving you your first sulfur input relative to how many oxygens are in the pipe. And if you get a really, really unlucky input bucket, red will run really fast, and it will hit its input alpha, and it will start this loop before there's enough oxygens that are outputted by the third reactor, and then things get really weirdly desynchronized. Red ends up stalling on an input beta somewhere along its line, and that causes everything to break apart, and then crashes happen. That only happens if red is running too fast. So that flip-flop there is to slow this reactor down to prevent lack of oxygen from the bottom pipe from crashing this reactor.
Also, first input bucket away solution, right?
I guess. Yeah, in theory, if I have long enough pipes so that I make sure that the oxygen never runs out, then this solution is relatively agnostic.
Well, this reactor...
Yeah, this one does... Well, this one does care, yes. This one does care about the input buckets. Yeah, the top one does care.
So yeah, this reactor assumes that for every 8 sulfur, you get 2 oxygen.
Yes, it does. This one is abusing the input bucket.
It's correct.
Yeah, but this is really impressive for something you came up with in a day.
I actually originally had a idea of there's a working name for this solve, and it was called overloaded input, because the first reactor is ultimately the rate limiting reactor here. The top left reactor is underloaded. There's a lot of input stalling, waiting on inputs. And the bottom reactor is also underloaded. And the last reactor is also underloaded. So I originally had a solve where I just shoveled the inputs in a more efficient loop, but it ended up like, what is it? Basically, it would split each input in half, left and right. But it ended up being a really big mess of really unfriendly ratios of sulfurs and oxygens, and I just did not have the time to actually make a solution that actually works out there. I'm sure someone else probably figured that out.
Okay.
I still have no idea how it can be natural to think of this puzzle like this.
Sorry, in what way?
This is a compliment.
Okay, I'll take it.
Okay, so I think we've seen the solution now. Thank you for coming on stage and explaining it, Brokios. And then we'll move on to the next.
All right, thank you.
In next place, we have Darius 1 with Furious. This one also takes 7 cycles per input and has a latency of 61 compared to the 93 of the previous one. By the way, instead of shoving all of these things into a corner where you can't read them anyway, you can also turn them off by clicking this box right here. So, this solution does partial fusion here again, and also a bit of sorting. So everything with a initially silicon, so after fusing one's phosphorus in the left position, which was the right position initially, gets moved to the top output, and everything that is just carbon or just nitrogen after fusing gets moved to the bottom output. And these are nice 7-cycle loops because of the rotate on each of them. Now, let's have a look at the bottom reactor, which is again rather simple because it always gets the same input. This is also double primed, and it just fuses once to already break the bond, output that, and then fuse again to not have to drop, and output.
Why doesn't it desync? Oh, it doesn't, right.
Yeah, this first reactor gives the rate, and then it just sits on the inputs. Wouldn't even really matter which Waldo has priority, just as long as one of the Waldos inputs something and the other one doesn't, it works. Now this reactor uses the 2 halves and has a sensor on the sense command on the other Waldo that is currently not near the sensor. So when it senses nitrogen, it issues a fuse command here, causing the other Waldo to no longer hold anything which means that the oxygen gets output right here. And when it does not sense the nitrogen, then there is no fuse command. It's still holding something and fuses it right there, which means that the sulfur always ends up in the top position and the oxygen in the bottom position. So this one uses one sensor here and one sensor there to split the work of sensing. And because of that, it does not need to do any bond sensing. Okay, then there is this final reactor. Let's wait for the first input. And this one also uses a sensor to determine if it gets sulfur or oxygen. So this is actually the only sensor that actually senses an atom that appears in an input or output. The other ones are checking for intermediate atoms. So if it detects that there is, first of all, it detects that there is no oxygen there, so it moves up here and grabs the sulfur, just bonds that to the oxygen, bonds another one to it, fuses that, and outputs. And when it detects that there's an oxygen right there, then it grabs that, fuses it to the sulfur, because of the way that there's either two sulfurs here or a sulfur together with an oxygen. You know that the next input after an oxygen will always be a sulfur, so you can input that here and bond to it, and then just bond another oxygen to that, fuse, and output.
So both fusion layers are meaningful, which I think is nice.
Yeah. Other than that,
By now we're starting to see the power of diamond topologies, because a diamond topology means that different kinds of input could be processed in meaningfully different ways.
Yeah, after the previous complicated solutions that used like weird big molecules and bond sensing, this is actually rather straightforward to follow and a nice solution that achieves 7 cycles per input. And the rate limit is actually this first reactor, but the other ones are also rather close. This one is stalling a bit, but I think this is almost running at the input rate. So yeah, the first and the last reactor are the limiting factors here. And it only takes 1321 cycles, making it about 67 cycles faster than the previous one. Now, in third place, we have Sir with a 6-cycle loop. 6 cycles per input. I never ran Brookio's solution to completion. All right. Completely forgot about that. Sorry. So Team Absolute Zero had 1388. Then Kuokre had 1353. And then Darius won 1321. So those are
which is a win on latency, because they all have the same asymptotics.
Yeah. And now we are moving on to faster throughput. And the solution is also called sneak emerging. And it does not use a diamond topology, it just uses a straight line. This first reactor handles the first input already as it is, and then starts building a chain out of inputs to not have to go all the way to the left to grab them. It is...
This is, it's quite surprising to see that. Well, I think there is quite enough time to not do that. It's just because it makes latency better.
Yeah, okay. And almost all of the fusion is already happening here, but the final fusion between those two atoms is happening later.
Also, it's quite surprising that you can just polarize the input right away. Because it seems counterintuitive that in order to do that, you first have to debond. Surely debonding would lose more time and consume more bond than it's worth. But this reactor has enough bonders for this kind of thing to happen.
Okay, yeah, Sir also said that this nonsense going on here is just to save 3 cycles of latency. Okay.
I think I pointed that out.
Yeah, you said, but you didn't say the exact number of cycles, I think.
Okay.
Anyway, let's move on to the second reactor. This one builds a chain of molecules, of atoms, just like our solution did. And then it sorts the pairs of atoms based on what is on the right side. So the oxygen gets moved to the bottom, and anything that contains at least one sulfur gets moved to the top. Yeah, so this is pretty clean. Let's move on to the next reactor. This one is rather interesting. So red is currently inputting, and then both Waldos are sensing if there's oxygen right here. And since it is not oxygen but sulfur, the red Waldo will continue and the blue will continue stuck in its back and forth here. And the red Waldo bonds the 2 sulfurs that it detected to the oxygen and brings them down here, adds even more oxygen, and outputs that right here. Then the next time there are not 2 sulfurs, but instead oxygen and sulfur. So this time the blue Waldo continues and red is going back and forth here. And now blue handles this by fusing into chromium and then going into another loop waiting for even more oxygen. And meanwhile red hit input and now it is sulfur again, so red goes and blue keeps waiting. So red does its loop again. And red is going again. Now it's blue and red is going around right here. It fuses this into another chromium and sends chromium and oxygen to the top output. So this is pretty interesting way of handling the inputs and turning them into two outputs that can both be used to create our chromium oxide. So let's see how that happens. The blue Waldo is waiting here and the red one is there. It fuses the oxygen to create chromium, then unbonds a bit, creates these horizontal bonds, unbonds there, and outputs those. So that is the loop that red is usually running. And when there is a bottom input every once in a while, then blue will wait here with the sensor until red is going, and then going after it to make sure they don't collide, doing a similar thing to create these bonds properly, and then debond the outputs from each other. So that's a pretty neat way to go from these half-sorted inputs to sort them here and create intermediate products, and then handle those a little bit more to create the output. Yeah, the third reactor is basically compressing the diamond layout top and bottom things into one reactor, but doesn't output the it outputs bigger molecules which contain enough atoms to create two outputs each. Okay, so let's run this to completion, and it takes 1148 cycles, which is a rather large drop of 173 cycles, I think, due to only having 6 cycles per input. Okay, so let's move on. Oh yeah, so the bottleneck for this is sorting in the second reactor sources. Yeah, I don't think this way of doing things can really run any faster than 6 cycles per input. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fundamental. How do you say it?
Fundamental limitation of handling these pairs of inputs from a stream like that.
And fundamental reason. Okay, I only know how to say it in Russian, so never mind.
Okay, so we went from 7 cycles to 6 cycles. Let's have a look at what second place is doing. Of course, Big Mango Head is doing it in 5 cycles now. And saying, I love latency, adjust reactor 1. We're back to the diamond layout. And this first reactor does some initial sorting, but does not change anything about the input. So it does not actually fuse anything together, but it does create this chain to be able to grab them from here rather than all the way over there. So then it has these 10 cycle loops right here, and it is double pumped, so it handles an input every 5 cycles. It just checks the rightmost atom here if it's silicon and moves it to the right, and if it's not silicon, it moves it to the top and knows that it's 2 carbons. Okay, now what do we do with these carbons? Well, they get fused into oxygen, also using this fuse here in order to not have to double back. And after fusing, the Waldo picks up this top atom again in order to output them both in the same place and also in order to not stall on an output, I think, but I'm not sure if that's actually relevant here. I think they stall on inputs at some point, so it's probably not relevant.
It has to fix its parity anyway.
Yeah. So this is sometimes stalling on input. The rate
Oh no, that's how to fix the parity.
Okay. Big Mango Head also says that he has a 5-cycle per input loop that does the exact same thing as Sir's solution in the first 2 reactors. He'll share it with the fun solutions, but then he couldn't get the 3rd reactor to work and preferred this idea. So what does he do with inputs that contain silicon? Well, this is also double pumped. The fusion happens the same way as before, and then grabbing the bottom one, which might be silicon or oxygen, sensing what it is. If it's silicon, drop it in the place right there. And if it's oxygen, not silicon, it's sulfur, of course. If it's oxygen, going down. Using that to already get chromium right here. So when it is sulfur, both of them just get dropped here. And when it is sulfur and oxygen, they get fused together into chromium already.
It's an advantage of the diamond layout topology that you can be quite slow in the intermediate reactors because they only get a fraction of the inputs.
Yeah, and then the final reactor, first of all, does some stalling on red here, wasting time. And then starts out into the loop where red grabs the chromium or sulfur. In this case, it's chromium, bonds it to oxygen from up there. And now it detects that it already is chromium by not being sulfur. So it just moves along. If it is sulfur instead, then it moves up here, bonds to another oxygen. And yeah, that's it. It fuses them together right there. Really nice how all of these inputs happen at the right time. And Brokios is asking what the rotate is doing, and yeah, it's just wasting time, as Big Mango Head says. The rate limit here is imposed by the first reactor, and the reactor right here might be able to go 1 or 2 cycles faster, maybe. Definitely 1. Big Mango Head even says 3 cycles, so by pushing into the output, so I assume you mean building like a stick of outputs Yeah, you could make this 3 cycles faster even. That's really cool. So this is just completely limited by the first reactor, and the other ones could all maybe be faster. Interesting.
I think this is the solution with possibly dubious pipe and water placements. Maybe Big Manga can explain himself better.
So yeah, Big Mango Head says that it runs at least 4 billion cycles.
By dubious, I mean it is not okay. It is very dubious, right?
We have no good reason to assume it wouldn't run forever, so surely it runs forever, right? Okay, yeah, it takes 986 cycles. It's really impressive that you managed to get a solution in under 1000 cycles. So yeah, the oxygen pipe has a length of 15. So Sir says it should be safe, assuming that the consumption happens at a constant rate. Okay, if you say so. Yeah, and finally, in first place, we have Alliterative Allies, which is a team consisting of Tough Thought and Britboy. And it is 7.5 cycles per output, which means it is 5 cycles per input, with a latency of 68 compared to Big Mango Head's 86, based on this specific definition of latency. And the first reactor looks rather similar. It does not actually special case the first input, but immediately starts building a chain. And then it's also doing this 10 cycle loop and separating out the carbon only input.
I half suspect latency could be improved here.
So
but I'm not that sure. I wouldn't claim it.
By special casing like the first input or something?
By grabbing the first input by an atom that is not the top left.
Yeah, maybe. But no, I'm also not sure on that. So, okay, let's see what happens with the carbons. It fuses the bottom half first into oxygen and outputs that, and then the other half and outputs that.
I think it has to fix some latency issues.
Yeah, it's doing some latency fixing around here, I think. So whenever there is no input yet, so when red is too slow or the previous reactor is too slow, something causes there to be no input here, then blue returns and grabs again. I'm not actually sure what the exact condition is to trigger that, but I'm sure it happens at some point. And we could do this. Okay, it does not happen during the time that it runs here, so it happens later. Interesting. Also, tough thought.
So it's our first case of meaningful behavior changes occurring after victory.
Yeah. Also, tough thought pointed out that this first input gets handed over between the two Waldos, so it doesn't really matter where blue grabs it. Yeah, that is true. Okay. Then let's have a look at the other reactor right here, which uses the top half here, while red is running over a sensor there. And then the bottom it knows will always be silicon, which turns into sulfur. So if it's two silicons, then this sensor up here triggers, outputting the atom as sulfur right there. And when it is this input, then no output happens and everything gets fused into chromium. So this doesn't have this awkward going around path that Big Mango had in the solution. What's up with the fuses on G6? So right here, it just fused the hydrogen into there. So in case it's this input, all the 6 atoms get fused together into chromium. And one of them happens right here. Yeah, and then the last reactor. Attaches oxygen to whatever is down there. If it's chromium, that just moves straight to the output zone. And if it is not chromium, it is sulfur, which moves up there and gets another oxygen fused into it. Also interesting that it fuses and then on the same cycle inputs again and then grabs that. So you can see that blue inputs here this oxygen and fuses it. Oh, that's different. But when it's red going up, then red inputs, red fuses, and in the same cycle blue inputs again, and then blue grabs right there. So that's pretty tight how they both use this oxygen input.
Yeah, this multitasking or using the same features for different things depending on the exact input reminds me of simple optimization. It's very cool that it's useful in the cycle model.
So Big Mango Head is asking Tough Thought about this hydrogen sensor. So maybe we can get an explanation for that now.
Presumably you could fix some other solutions this way, while preserving good latency. But I did not think of that at all.
Yeah, the usual fix to solutions not running forever is just making the pipes longer, but maybe you can detect those cases sometimes with sensors and go into some different cases that handle them, which doesn't actually happen for the first 120 outputs. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. Tough Thought says the sensor in reactor 2 is too low, the grab to coincide with the input. After 120 outputs, the input sometimes doesn't come, so Blue needs to backtrack. Yeah. So this is only 968 cycles compared to the previous 986 by Big Mango Head. So it wins by 18 cycles, I think. Yeah, definitely congratulations to both of you for having such good solutions. And it's just a little bit of latency in between them.
Yeah. And alliterative allies solution does not look all that crazy. It just makes a lot of correct choices that allow for such a short Zulu loop.
Yeah, we really had the most crazy solutions by Team Absolute Zero and Quarkre for their bond sorting, which took 7 cycles per input, and then we have just pretty clean solutions for 5 cycles per input. That's interesting how that turns out sometimes. How long does it take for that sensor to be relevant? We could test that now, but I would need to modify this level and re-import the solutions. So I'm not really that interested in doing that. Maybe at the very end, after looking at fun solutions, we can do that again. Okay, so we are done with the scoring solutions, and we will have a look at the fun solutions. Ah yeah, we can run the output somewhere else. That makes sense. Thanks, Big Mango Head. What did I want to change? This one. So already after 1027 cycles, we reach this case, and red has just moved once. So red was just 1 cycle late. Is there a good way to find out why it is late?
The reason is not illuminating.
Yeah. But it happens.
It's just because it's a bad permutation of the inputs bucket.
Well, I also just noticed these 2 buttons for the first time. I think Zaboka added them recently, and I have not seen them before. Okay.
Yeah. This works because Because it has the right parity anyway.
Yeah, so
Or does it care about parity? I think it does.
I mean, it hits a sink here anyway, so this sink and this sink will line it back up. I'm not sure. So when there are too few inputs with two carbons together, then this can happen. Tough Thought says. Okay. Okay, yeah. I think we've explored that enough. Let's move on to the fun solutions. The first one is by Big Mango Head, titled 87,582,995. And that is a reference to the cycle count where it crashes. So we can see that it works fine for 128 outputs. And then if we do this, it crashes at some point. But I'm not going to run this while recording a video. So you will just have to imagine that crashing after 87 million cycles. Exactly, the proof is left as an exercise to the watcher. So 986,180, and what you submitted is 986,178. So you even removed two symbols and removed the crash somehow. The pipe out of the first reactor into the lower one is a length of 5. That was the wrong button. And in your other solution, it has also a length of 5. Okay. How did you fix it then? Okay, you just made this reactor faster.
It's a meaningful improvement.
Okay. Great. Next, we have a unnamed solution by Kurokwe. It is a single reactor solution and also single Waldo solution that is rather symbol optimized. Brokios says here has a 26 symbol. So what exactly is this? Is this just meant to be symbol optimization, or is it meant to be single Waldo and then symbol optimization? Okay. Single Waldo symbol optimized. Okay.
I suspect it coincides with just symbol optimized.
Well, I suspect it doesn't because of the next fun solution I'm going to show. But we can get to that later. So this just extracts a single hydrogen from each input and throws the rest into the recycler. So basically hydrogen grinding, but since we don't have any split options here, we just take hydrogen from our input and recycle the rest. And when it becomes oxygen, the sensor right here activates. And it builds an oxygen stick there to the left. So the next one gets put there. Then the next one gets added. And when it reaches 4 oxygens, it blindly grabs that right there. and grabs it there again, then fuses and drops it there. Because, of course, why bond it right now when you can run over a bond later again? And yeah, when it reaches oxygen the next time, it creates the double bond and outputs it.
I have to suspect it would be more correct to fuse away the atom that you would be grabbing into the stick, so you don't have to drop explicitly. But I don't know. I haven't thought about it much.
Yeah, I think there are several things that are not necessarily optimal about the solution, but we can also have a look at the updated version that Brokios just sent in chat. So this one is 25 symbols. Wait, there's a pause right here and then it crashes.
Oops, I sent you the wrong solution file. Don't worry about it. Yeah, basically, I had a 27 or 26 symbol solution working where the bond minus is no longer exists. You just fuse away the thing. But the way that it handles the fusion once it creates the force stick is still not very good. So, oh well.
Okay. So, like, one thing that bothers me about this a bit is this bond minus, because you could also just fuse together two hydrogens and that would create helium, which already immediately debonds it, and you would make oxygen from heliums. I feel
Maybe it's not correct for other reasons.
I feel like that could be
Correct as in leads to low symbols.
Yeah, so anyway, after seeing you upload a symbol solution, I also tried making a symbol solution, but I did not make it single Waldo. I just made a general symbol solution, which is 22 symbols right here. And it creates helium. And once it gets oxygen, it builds a stick downwards. And the really annoying thing about this solution was finding a place for hitting the output. And I could only do that with a second Waldo, because it needs to be after bonding these two together and before dropping that again. And yeah, the problem is that there is no space between these output zones where you can just have a single atom sitting and not get output. Any atom that sits around here will be in one of the two output zones, and when running over these output commands all the time, that's a problem. So yeah, I needed the second Waldo to hit output in the exact right time. And then when there are 4 oxygens, it grabs that, rotates, fuses. It's also kind of annoying that there are 4 fuse commands, and you would really like to get rid of them, but I did not find a good way to do that. When using blue as a fuse hammer, you need some other way to detect when the output is done, and that I could only do by adding a 4 counter right there, and that ended up being 23 symbols in total. So yeah, this is the best I could find, but I also did not spend that much time on this. Just wanted to have something with fewer symbols than the other team. And what is interesting here is this CRO gets just left on there with the drop command that is already there for other reasons, and then it runs over the bond command, which is there for other reasons. And it just sits there. And then when the next oxygen gets created, it goes there, tries to bond, but this oxygen already has 2 bonds, so it can't bond to it, and instead gets output. So that is pretty nice.
Perhaps it's not relevant that it has no more bonds because you could get the operation to happen first by switching colors.
Now, what do you mean?
Perhaps it's not relevant that it has no more bond slots available.
I know it is really relevant. It only works this way. Switching colors breaks this.
Why does it?
Because right now there's an oxygen chain sitting here. You can't just output this at any time other than between this bond and the drop when coming from the top. So if you hit output at any time before this bond or after this drop, something gets output here, which is not intended to get output. And yeah, it's not particularly fast.
I see.
So
Sorry.
the previous was 1 Waldo symbol optimized. I'm not sure it's fully optimized, but decently optimized. And this one is 2 Waldos decently symbol optimized. And then we also have a single Waldo, single reactor wasteless solution right here, because who needs a recycler? That looks like this. And it just fuses these things together into oxygen and sulfur and throws them into a loopback pipe, and does that with the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inputs, I think. And then it inputs individual atoms. It first checks if it is oxygen, which it isn't, so it throws it away. And then it once again checks if it is oxygen. This time it is oxygen, so it moves on to the next step, which is checking if there is a sulfur attached to it. And there is no sulfur attached to it, so it doesn't move on, and instead attaches a new atom to its left, and then does some bond fixing here. Then it detects that it has sulfur, so it moves on to the third sensor, where it checks if it has oxygen next to it, which it doesn't, so it attaches a new atom to it, then fixes bonds again, checks if it is oxygen on the left. It is not, so it debonds that and throws it away. And then attaches something else, which is still wrong, so it throws that away again. And once it has the oxygen, sulfur, oxygen chain that it actually wants, it adds one more bond right here. It fuses the oxygen and sulfur into chromium, and then it outputs. And because for every input you need 1.5, for every output you need 1.5 new inputs, there's the sensor, which, this flip-flop, which either goes here or there. Going here means requesting one input, and going there means requesting two outputs, two inputs. This is, it's not sorting anything, it just has a queue of atoms right here and cycles through that queue looking for the thing that is currently looking for. And this is long enough due to input buckets always containing at least one of the atoms that it's looking for. I'm pretty sure it would run forever. I didn't test it extensively, but based on the way I designed this to be long enough to hold, yeah, this should run forever. There's enough space here to contain all the oxygens created plus at least one silicon? No, sulfur? What is it? Sulfur, I think. Yes. And then it inputs again, and it handles every input bucket. It would handle them independently, but it also inputs part of the next input bucket while still handling the previous one, but that doesn't make it crash in any way, it just makes it more likely to find what it's looking for. I mean, I can do that, but it's not going to run very far.
So there's no theoretical limit to it, as in there is a concrete upper bound on the amount of feedback pipe needed. Namely, it depends on some kind of lowest common multiple of the amount of inputs it goes through and input bucket size.
I'm running this fast by clicking the button 4 on my keyboard, or this triple arrow or quadruple arrow. Which should be unlimited speed, which is only limited by my computer's capability of running SpaceChem while streaming and recording. Yeah, this is a community edition feature with this unlimited speed, but it has been there since 2020, as Sabokas says. Then we had some more people posting solutions. So Big Mango had sent something.
Alright, sorry, I have to go now.
Yeah, okay, bye.
Bye.
So this is by Big Mango Head, 5 cycle per input, copy times 3, reactor 2. So 5 cycles per input and the first 2 reactors of the approach that Sir was using. But then Big Mango Head couldn't figure out the rest at this speed. So we went for a different approach, which he could do at 5 cycles per input. Yeah, this is just a 10 cycle loop here, which is double pumped, so 5 cycles. And what is going on here? It's creating a stick of 6 atoms. Then doing sensing in these places. It's interesting. So it takes 4 cycles per sense operation. And meanwhile, the other Waldo is already building a stick again. Brokios points out 20% of the issue with doing 5 cycles per input like this is that the second reactor needs 2 inputs every 5 cycles. So 20% of your Waldo end up being input commands, and that's really tough to handle. Yeah. And then this is sending everything that has a oxygen on the left or previously in the lower position to the upper output and the other things to the lower output. We can also see those nodes like that. So oxygen and sulfur here, 2 oxygens there, and this one outputs only sulfur, but sometimes with 1 bond, sometimes with 2 bonds. Okay, interesting. Then I'm downloading another solution here by Brokios. Hello?
Hi. Yeah, this is the fixed version with 26 symbols. Yeah, there's no more bond minus because you can just fuse it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing exciting to see here. One of the things I was the reason why I sent you a broken solution is because I was trying to see if I could take the down arrow at I2. That way I can do a fuse on I5 and I6 and then bounce back up. But that doesn't quite work. Reason being that the sensor gets in the way of the output.
Yeah,
because you want to bounce back up, go to the left, and then drop there, but then that covers up your sensor spot, and yeah. Oh well.
Okay. So we've also seen this now. So in terms of fun solutions, what did we have? We had Big Mango Head, which crashes after a lot of cycles, allegedly. I think we can trust that. Quark, which this was single Waldo and then symbol optimized, and even further symbol optimized here. And we had something that Big Mingo Head was showing what he was working on, but not necessarily a fun solution. So yeah, single Waldo symbol optimized. Still not the most creative thing, but you can get a full fun point for that. Nobody else has done anything like this. I mean, I did after seeing your submission, but hydrogen grinding is always fun. Yeah, you get a full fun point. And Big Mango Head gets this was basically a legitimate solution that just happens to crash at some point. So yeah, you can get a quarter of a fun point for that. So just for submitting something interesting to talk about, even if it wasn't specifically created as a fun solution, I think we can do a quarter of a point. So yeah, I agree with Rex Kicks on that. We have seen all the solutions, all the fun solutions, and have a quick look at the next round, which already started yesterday. It's Euclid's Elements, and it's about compass and straight edge construction. So you're given 2 input atoms right here and need to construct a compass and a straight edge out of those. You have 8 bonders, 2 fusion lasers, 2 fission lasers, even get some quantum tunnels, and a sensor. Can do pretty much whatever you want, but you should optimize for the product of symbols and cycles in this one. And there's also a bit of a penalty again for grab drops, but that shouldn't matter too much, hopefully. So this is both a symbols and a cycles puzzle. Other than that, I don't really have anything to say about it. So that is it for this stream. I'm going to end the recording now. Bye.